Karen, a middle-aged white woman, was strolling through the park when she noticed a black man hurrying past with a white girl in his arms. The man, Matthew, 30, looked tense, his eyes darting around. The girl, Annie, 9 years old, had puffy red eyes and tear-streaked cheeks, her small hands clutching his shirt. Karen, known for her sharp eye and love of neighborhood gossip, couldn't ignore it. Recent news reports about missing children buzzed in her mind. She stopped in her tracks, fished out her phone, and called the police before striding toward him. "Hey, you filthy kidnapper," she yelled, blocking his way. "What are you doing with that girl?" "I've already called the cops." Annie flinched, her quiet sniffles turning into frightened sobs. Matthew adjusted his hold on her, speaking softly to calm her. His tone was steady, but urgency pressed his movements. "I didn't kidnap her," Matthew said firmly, stepping around Karen. But Karen wasn't backing down. She planted herself in front of him again. "Oh, you're not going anywhere. The police are on their way. You think you can get away with this? We'll see about that." Matthew's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Annie's crying grew louder, the tension crackling around them. The flashing red and blue lights arrived, and a group of white officers surrounded Matthew in seconds. "Put your hands up and step away from the girl," one of them ordered. Matthew lowered Annie to the ground gently and raised his hands. "I'm not a kidnapper. I'm trying to help her," he said, his voice measured but desperate. One officer crouched to Annie's level. "Is this man your father?" he asked. Still crying, Annie shook her head. The officers didn't wait for more. They grabbed Matthew, twisting his arms behind him. "Stop!" Matthew protested, struggling against their hold. His pulse pounded. He couldn't get arrested. With a sharp twist, he broke free, grabbed Annie, and took off running. Annie clung to him, her arms tight around his neck, her sobs muffled against his chest. "Stop him!" Karen shrieked as the officers chased after them, their shouts and the wail of sirens echoing through the park. The police quickly launched an investigation. Recent reports showed that most of the missing children were black, around Annie's age, with her being a rare white exception. Adding to the suspicion was Matthew's escape, which led the officers to conclude that filthy black man is definitely the kidnapper. He must be trying to kidnap Annie for ransom. They also knew that Annie's father, Dr. Thomas, was a well-known scientist, celebrated for his inventions and valued by the state. When Thomas personally showed up at the police station to report his daughter's disappearance, the officers couldn't help but assume that solving this case quickly was key to winning favor with him. Further investigation revealed that Matthew worked as a doctor at Annie's school. A black idiot like him being a doctor? He must have gotten the job just to kidnap children, another chimed in. That damn black criminal has no idea whose daughter he's messing with. The police issued a nationwide manhunt for Matthew. In less than a day, a tip-off led the police to a warehouse on the outskirts, where they surrounded the area. The white police chief led a group to break down the door, ready to arrest Matthew and Annie. But what they found shocked them. Inside were several malnourished black children, their eyes hollow from hunger, staring fearfully at the officers. Quickly regaining their composure, the police spotted Matthew kneeling beside a child, syringe in hand, about to administer an injection. The chief immediately aimed his gun at Matthew and shouted, "Stop! You're under arrest." But Matthew didn't stop. Just as the officers were about to fire, Annie rushed in front of him, crying out, "Please don't shoot. Let him help my friend." Her words froze the room. Annie, raised in luxury by her famous scientist father, had lived a lonely life since her mother's death. Her father, Thomas, was too busy, and she found companionship with Lena, a black child working in his factory. Thomas had been exploiting child labor in his factory, and the children were exposed to toxic fumes every day. When Lena was poisoned, Annie begged her father for help, but he callously dismissed her. Desperate, Annie turned to Matthew for help. Now, Matthew, knowing the risks, had come to save Lena. Even as guns pointed at him, Annie, despite the danger, stood between him and the officers. Lena was given urgent care and soon began breathing easier, smiling at Annie. The police slowly lowered their weapons. Matthew, now calm, spoke to them. "These children are victims of your scientist. His machines don't require precision parts, but fragile hands like theirs. These kids were abducted to work, breathing toxic fumes daily. He needs them to build his machines, and they're paying the price. Please save them." As the police were processing the truth, a group of guards loyal to Dr. Thomas stormed in, creating a tense standoff. The lead guard sneered. "Do you have a search warrant? Without it, we'll sue you." The police chief, holding his ground, snapped, "Release the children. You're breaking the law." Just then, Dr. Thomas appeared, coldly demanding, "Annie, why did you go with that filthy black man?" Annie hesitated but replied softly, "I just wanted him to help Lena." Thomas scoffed. "Help? He has no right. These black children are nothing but cheap labor to me. I'll discard them whenever I please." The chief couldn't hold back any longer. "These are children, not tools. You'll go to jail for this." Only then did Thomas notice the police, his face twisted with contempt as he shouted, "You can't arrest me. My masterpiece isn't finished yet. Why not use these black rats for my inventions?" The officers, once in awe of the famed scientist, were now disillusioned by his twisted views. The chief immediately ordered Thomas's arrest. As the guards were subdued, Thomas, in a desperate bid to escape, grabbed Annie and held a scalpel to her throat. "One more step and I'll kill her." The officers were stunned, but Annie, trembling at first, suddenly bit her father's hand hard enough to make him let go. She darted toward Matthew, who was waiting with open arms. A shot rang out, hitting Thomas in the leg, and he collapsed. Thomas was arrested and faced a slew of charges: child abduction, exploitation, and endangering lives. His reputation, once revered, was destroyed, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The abused children were safely taken to recovery, and Matthew, cleared of the false accusations, was hailed as a hero. Annie approached Matthew, throwing her arms around him in gratitude. He hugged her back warmly, saying, "Thank you. You gave me faith in justice." But Annie shook her head and replied, "No, you're the real hero." The case was closed, but the light of truth and justice would never fade.